Well, deputies say that call for help first came when a man waved them down. Women state that White told detectives he and Gurlala got into frequent arguments. He claimed one of their final fights began when the victim pulled his hair, but he refused to.
I just feel like this is crazy. This is too crazy for me.
On the evening of November 14th, 2025, in Lauderdale Lakes, Florida, a 21-year-old transgender woman named Maurice Jaden Harrison was shot to death in her own car, parked in the driveway of a residential home. Online, her followers knew her by a different name, Gurlala. The shooter was a man she called her boyfriend. The two of them were sitting together in that car when whatever was happening between them turned fatal. He didn't run. He stood right there next to the car, phone in hand, and a few minutes later, he was the one who called 911. In this video, we're going to break down what pushed this relationship to the breaking point, and why the same man who had just pulled the trigger was, minutes later, begging a dispatcher to save the life he'd taken. Maurice Jaden Harrison grew up in Broward County, Florida, and by 21 was living in Pompano Beach, working as a hairstylist. That job became the foundation of her online identity. She built a following as a wig influencer. Her videos followed a formula fans came to recognize instantly. The bare wig base, the fiber work, the styling, color matching to a client's exact skin tone, and finally, the reveal, set to music. That consistency is what made her a known name in a pretty niche corner of the internet, the wig and transformation content space. The numbers vary depending on the source, but here's the general picture. 235,000 followers on TikTok, somewhere between 37,000 and 44,000 on Instagram. At her peak, her videos had racked up more than 15 million likes combined. Beyond TikTok and Instagram, she also ran a smaller YouTube channel called Life for Gurlala. Friends and family remembered her as someone who lit up a room just by walking into it. For a lot of her followers, she was the first transgender person they'd ever really gotten to know, even if it was only through a phone screen. And her content gave young people searching for the right words about their own identity something to hold on to. Her family talked about a bright future that had been ahead of her. Her content stood apart from the usual calm, tutorial-style beauty channel. She went fast, paced, funny, full of jokes to the camera between styling steps and quick dance breaks set to whatever song was popular that week. And judging by the comments, that's exactly what her audience showed up for. A year before her own death, Harrison had already buried her brother, shot and killed in an unrelated incident. So by December 2025, this was the second time in under 2 years that the same family had lost someone to gun violence. Some open sources, not major outlets, mentioned that in the summer of 2025, Harrison's name turned up in Broward County records connected to a minor offense, theft, and driving on a suspended license. That detail is less reliable than everything else in this case, and we're flagging it as such. Sinead White Jr., 25 at the time, lived in Lauderdale Lakes, right next door to Pompano Beach. Online people knew him as Shabba. He graduated from Dillard High School in Fort Lauderdale, a school with a long football tradition that sent plenty of players onto the college level. White was one of them. Sembos Prea Sabazumalba Bintum Walben, he landed at Bethune-Cookman University, where in 2019 he appeared on the football roster as a freshman defensive tackle, a position built for size and strength in the trenches. As far as the record shows, that was it. One season, no further mentions of a playing career at the college or pro level. By 2025, football was long behind him. He was just another guy living a quiet life in Lauderdale Lakes, far from whatever spotlight had once followed him as a college athlete. Back in November 2022, White was arrested on a domestic violence charge. The arrest report describes repeated physical and malicious assault against the victim. That victim wasn't Harrison. It was someone else, from an earlier relationship before he and Harrison were ever together. She chose not to pursue the case. It never went to trial, and White was never criminally charged. Life went on for him in Lauderdale Lakes. That incident would have stayed buried if reporters hadn't dug it up 3 years later, after everything that happened with Harrison, revealing a documented pattern of violence that predated their relationship entirely. Harrison and White were together for years. Exactly how many is disputed. Most reports say 3 years, a few say 7. They filmed together constantly, and Harrison posted it all. Clips of them laughing, listening to music, catching bits of her workday, with White sometimes drifting into frame just as the guy standing next to her. To anyone scrolling past, it looked like the same kind of couple content that's all over TikTok. Nothing that would have made this particular relationship stand out from 1,000 others just like it. To her followers, White wasn't a public figure in his own right. He was a supporting character in her story.
What it was in your face for?
Nothing. They was asking me something.
For that long?
He never built his own following, never had his own presence online. Whatever image the public had of this relationship came entirely from what Harrison chose to show them. And that's exactly why the warning signs that later surfaced in her own videos went unnoticed for so long. People weren't watching an outside observer's footage. They were watching the version of events Harrison herself decided to edit and post. Friends and relatives, speaking to reporters after her death, kept coming back to the same word: turbulent, unstable. It shows up in nearly every article written about this couple, no matter the outlet or the language. After Harrison died, people started going back through those old videos, not for entertainment this time, but looking for something they'd missed. In one clip, there's a cut across her nose and under her eye. She explains it away on camera, saying she and her partner fight constantly.
You wetting me? No, for what? I'm sitting at the beach.
In another, there's a bite mark on her arm. In another, hiding her face from the camera, she jokes that White is cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. Slang borrowed from the old cereal mascot, meaning crazy, off the rails. Other clips reportedly show more of the same: torn wigs, bite marks, bruises, always delivered with a laugh, never once hinting that there might be something darker underneath than two people who'd been together a long time just bickering. At the time, none of it raised alarm bells. Archived comments show the reaction was exactly what Harrison seemed to be going for. Jokes, laughter, the same light-hearted tone she brought to the videos herself. It wasn't until after November 14th that people started watching those same clips through a completely different lens. That reinterpretation, happening only in hindsight, is what fueled the public conversation about abuse in this relationship, not anything raised while she was still alive. Other footage of White also surfaced afterward, in which he makes blunt comments about only being attracted to the most beautiful transgender women, and mentions wanting out of the relationship with Harrison before it ended. According to multiple reports, in the lead up to November 14th, Harrison had told close friends and family she was planning to leave him. None of that is backed by official investigative documents. It's coming from people close to the couple and posts that surfaced after the tragedy, so treat it as after-the-fact testimony, not confirmed fact. Put it all together. The 2022 violence report involving someone else, years of an unstable relationship with Harrison, video evidence of physical altercations, talk of a breakup, and the question writes itself: was this one bad night, or the outcome of something that had been building for years? Nobody can answer that now. Harrison isn't here to. There's another question just as important. Why didn't anyone catch it? Not the people close to them, not the tens of thousands of followers watching daily. The same signs that look so obvious now went completely unnoticed for years. Maybe the answer is baked into the format itself. Something filmed as a joke gets received as a joke, not a cry for help. And that holds true even when the footage shows visible signs of a beating, seconds before the person on camera smiles again. There's a third question that almost never comes up when people talk about this case, but it's hard to ignore once you line up the timeline. If a domestic violence report had been sitting in the system under White's name since 2022, could anyone in Harrison's circle have found it? Could she have known? There's no public record that answers that, but just the possibility that a check like that was even available adds another layer of weight to everything that happened after. Before we get into what happened that night, if this case has you hooked, hit that like button. It helps get stories like this one seen. Subscribe so you don't miss the next investigation, and drop a comment. What's your read on this case? Now, let's get back into it. Friday, November 14th, 2025.
Well, we're learning new details tonight about the moments leading up to the death of Maurice Harrison.
Well, deputies say that call for help first came when a man waved them down along this street.
By White's own account to investigators, the two of them argued multiple times throughout the day. What actually set those arguments off isn't in the record. All we know is that the tension had been building all day, not something that boiled over out of nowhere that night. Nothing in the documents lays out exactly where Harrison and White were earlier that day, whether they were together the whole time or in and out of contact, or whether it was one long fight with breaks or several separate blow-ups in different places. That detail, argued several times throughout the day, comes straight from one of the two people involved, not from any independently pieced together timeline. We can take it as fact. We just can't go any deeper than that. Just before 7 p.m., a beige Chevrolet Malibu, White's car, pulled into a driveway on a residential block in the 3300 block of Northwest 37th Avenue in Lauderdale Lakes. Harrison was in the front passenger seat. White was behind the wheel. This wasn't some bar parking lot or an isolated back road. It was an ordinary street where people park in front of their own houses and go to bed before midnight. Nothing about the location itself hinted at what was coming. It wasn't secluded and it wasn't unwitnessed. The block was lined with houses, and one of those homes had a Tesla parked outside with a camera that would end up being the single most important piece of evidence in this entire case. In mid-November, the sun sets around 5:30 in Florida. By 7, it's already dark. That matters because whatever the Tesla's camera caught, it caught under streetlights and headlights, not daylight. That's why the footage clearly shows movement, silhouettes, and the flash of the gunshot itself, but it doesn't give you facial expressions or fine detail the way daylight footage would. Everything else we know comes from two sources that line up almost word for word: the arrest warrant and the surveillance footage. According to the warrant, the second the car stopped in that driveway, both doors cracked open, just for a moment, like someone was about to step out and then thought better of it, or like something inside the car had interrupted whatever was happening. Then the driver's door opened again.
Moment. In the footage, you could see what looks like White Jr. stepping out of a car holding what appears to be a gun, and Gurlala leaning out of the front passenger seat.
That's the moment the footage shows White pulling a gun from his waistband and firing toward the passenger seat. One shot, not a burst. And that detail matters because it doesn't match up with what the neighbors say they heard. Neighbors interviewed afterward independently reported hearing 2 shots. One neighbor's wife told reporters she heard the first one around 10 minutes to 7, a few minutes earlier than the time listed in the official report. That kind of gap is normal in cases like this. Nobody's checking a clock the second they hear a loud bang that doesn't immediately register as a gunshot instead of a door slamming or something falling. And here's a detail nobody's been able to fully explain. The video only shows one muzzle flash, but neighbors reported 2 distinct shots. Investigators later recovered 2 spent shell casings at the scene, so 2 shots were fired, no question. But only one made it onto camera, likely because the camera wasn't locked onto the car itself, just the general area around it. Whether that second shot came before or after the car pulled into frame is something nobody's been able to nail down from what's publicly available. The passenger door opened, and according to Harrison's family, she tried to get out of the car. There's no way to know if that was a conscious effort to escape. Someone who understood exactly what had happened and was trying to put distance between herself and the danger. Or a final, involuntary movement from a body that had already lost control. There's no evidence that separates those 2 possibilities. And the only person who could tell us didn't survive the night. The camera caught what would become the case's central piece of evidence. It shows White stepping out of the driver's side, holding something that looks like a gun. He walks around to the passenger side, where Harrison, already limp, is partly hanging out of the door.
You could then see White Jr. walking over and placing Gurlala back inside the vehicle.
He grabs her by the hair and shoves her back into the car. That footage also puts an end to any question of whether someone else was there when the shot was fired. Only 2 people show up in frame, White and Harrison. No bystanders, no other cars, no movement on the street beyond the 2 of them, which rules out any theory involving a third party, if anyone was even entertaining one. That moment, grabbing her by the hair and forcing her back into the car, is the only documented action between the shot and whatever White did next, and there's no version of self-defense or first aid that explains it. It doesn't look like someone trying to help an injured person. It doesn't look like panic from a bystander who stumbled onto a shooting. After that, the footage shows White walking around the car with a phone in his hand. There's no way to tell how long that lasted. Seconds, maybe longer. The recording doesn't tell us if he was talking to someone, dialing, or just holding the phone. All we can say for sure is that time passed between him shoving Harrison's body back into the car and him standing there, phone in hand. A stretch of time that's only captured visually, with no sound and no explanation from anyone, including White himself. Everything before the shot is explained, however inconsistently, by White's own account. Everything after is documented by the 911 call. But those seconds walking around the car with the phone in his hand? Silent. A visual fact with no commentary attached. Not from investigators, not from White. As for what actually set things off, The only explanation White has given investigators is that the fight escalated when Harrison pulled his hair.
Documents state that White told detectives he and Gerlala got into frequent arguments, including several earlier that same day.
He admitted to drawing the gun after that, but when asked what happened with the weapon after that, whether there was a direct action or, as he later suggested, a struggle over the gun inside the car, he wouldn't go into detail. "She pulled my hair" doesn't come close to explaining what happened next. And you don't need any special expertise to see that gap. If you take that explanation at face value, there's no logical bridge between a moment of irritation and a fatal gunshot. Either something much bigger set this off than what he's describing, or the decision to grab that gun had already been made before the hair pulling ever happened, and that was just the final spark for something already in motion. There's no way, based on what's public, to know which one it was. And here's where a direct contradiction enters the case, one that's going to be central to everything that follows. The struggle over the gun version implies chaos. Two people grabbing at each other inside a cramped car, a shot going off by accident as someone's finger slips onto the trigger during the scramble. The Tesla footage, according to investigators, tells a different story. A deliberate walk toward the open door, a gun pulled from behind the waistband, a motion that takes a beat, a decision, and a shot fired at one specific target, the passenger seat where Harrison was sitting. That's not just a discrepancy in the details. That's two entirely different stories about whether this was spontaneous or planned, and it's going to be one of the deciding factors in how this case plays out. What we know next comes from the 911 call. White made himself. His voice is panicked, urgent. "I need help," he tells the dispatcher over and over. "You better hurry and come. Hurry and come." That line repeats several times on the recording, almost like saying it faster could make help arrive faster. When the dispatcher asks for the address, White admits he doesn't know it, but keeps begging for help anyway, doing whatever he can to help them find his location. That contradiction alone is one of the most unsettling parts of this entire case. A man fires a gun at point-blank range, and minutes later, he's the one pleading to save the life he just took. We can't know what was running through his head in that moment. Panic at what he'd done, some desperate attempt to undo it, or something else entirely that no audio recording can tell us. What we can say is this: the first call for help in this case didn't come from a neighbor. It came from the shooter. When patrol cars showed up, White flagged them down himself, waving his arms to get the deputy's attention, then leading them straight to the beige Malibu in the driveway. He didn't run. He didn't fight. By every account, he made contact with law enforcement before anyone else even had the chance to call it in through normal channels. There's no minute-by-minute public record of what the Broward County deputies did between arriving on scene and arresting White, so here we're relying on standard procedure rather than direct testimony. Under that procedure, first responders are trained to check on the victim's condition and locate any armed individual at the same time, not one after the other, if the scene allows it. Given that White walked out to meet them, didn't resist, and pointed them straight to the car, the most likely scenario is that he was detained almost immediately, possibly before anyone even knew whether Harrison would survive and before a full ambulance crew had arrived. When officers reached the car, they found blood everywhere. The passenger seat soaked through, a pool on the floorboard, drops on the asphalt by the open door, mixed in with medical supplies already left behind by whoever tried to help before police got there. Inside the car, behind the passenger seat, they found a pistol, holstered, not tossed on the seat or kicked under the pedals. That detail stands out on its own. The gun appears to have been put away after the shot was fired, not left wherever it landed during some sudden, chaotic struggle. 2 9mm shell casings were recovered at the scene, matching the number of shots the neighbors reported hearing. Harrison, suffering from multiple gunshot wounds, was rushed to Broward Health Medical Center in Fort Lauderdale. How much time passed between the shooting and her arrival at the hospital isn't specified anywhere public. She was pronounced dead shortly after she got there. White was arrested on scene, and the weapon was seized. What came next was procedural, booked, taken in for an initial interview, where he gave the same account, an argument over hair, followed by a struggle over the gun. It's worth pointing out how unusual it is for a suspect to confess to the shooting almost immediately and voluntarily, even with the struggle caveat attached. Most defendants in cases like this either deny involvement outright or claim self-defense from the very start. White didn't deny pulling the trigger. He only disputed whether it was intentional or the result of a struggle. That doesn't change the legal weight of what happened. but it does tell you what version of events investigators had to work with from day one. While all of that was playing out procedurally, something else was happening. The reaction from people who knew Harrison not as a name in a police report, but as someone they actually cared about, in person or through a screen. There's no clean timeline in public sources for who found out and when, but given how big her following was, it's unlikely news spread slowly, the way it might for someone without a public profile. Word almost certainly reached most of her circle within hours. The first official word came from the Broward County Sheriff's Office, and that statement became the anchor for most of the news coverage that followed. But by the time it reached the major outlets, a chunk of Harrison's audience, based on the comments and reposts, was already piecing together the story on their own, working off rumors, screenshots, and guesswork before any official charge had even been announced. For a while, unverified versions of events were circulating right alongside the far more careful, restrained language coming from law enforcement. As soon as word got out, some of Harrison's followers started what amounted to an amateur investigation, going back through her old videos, not to watch them the way they used to, but looking for evidence, trying to understand what had really been going on in her life. Friends who spoke to local reporters afterward talked about her with a grief that comes through clearly in the interviews. One friend, Jasmine Lassan, said Harrison loved making people smile and that everyone who knew her respected her.
We all have something in common in here. We all love Miami. And I want to say, when y'all think to cry, or when y'all think that y'all can't figure it out because y'all feel so down for Miami, remember the good times that my friend had.
Harrison's aunt, Jazz Lesson, added that they hoped to keep her name alive. Less a comfort, more a promise. What stands out about those comments is what's missing. Nobody expressed shock that violence had happened at all. Just grief. None of her friends, at least publicly, questioned who White was or what their relationship had really been like. Not in those first few days. The focus was entirely on the loss. Her family, understandably, wasn't ready to speak on camera right away. Instead, they released a written statement through a local outlet, thanking people for their prayers and support, and saying they hoped justice would be fully served.
And tonight, the suspect remains behind bars, facing several charges, including first-degree murder with a firearm.
White was charged with first-degree murder with a firearm, with premeditation specified. He was booked into the Broward County Sheriff's Office's main detention facility, the county's largest holding center, where every detainee passes through before sentencing or transfer into the state system. Over the weekend following his arrest, he appeared before a judge who denied bail. Denying bail in a first-degree murder case isn't rare in Florida. It's standard. State law presumes bail should be denied for this charge if prosecutors can show the court enough evidence to support it. By the time the bail hearing happened, the judge already had the Tesla footage and the neighbors' statements about the gunshots in hand, more than enough to take pre-trial release off the table. The charge itself is worth sitting with for a second. First-degree murder in Florida requires proving premeditation, that the decision to kill was made ahead of time, not something that erupted in the heat of an argument. That's a completely different legal territory than second-degree murder or manslaughter, where all prosecutors need to show is that the death resulted from the defendant's actions, planned or not. The centerpiece of the entire case is that Tesla dashcam footage. It didn't come from the neighbor who owned the camera. It came from Harrison's own friends, who apparently got access to it before investigators did and handed it over to police themselves. That's worth pausing on. The most important piece of evidence in a murder case reached investigators because people close to the victim went and got it, not through the standard process of pulling footage from nearby homes. How exactly Harrison's friends got that footage before the official investigation even started raises questions nobody's answered publicly. Did they go straight to the Tesla owner, knowing the camera was there? Did the owner hand it over voluntarily before police ever came asking? None of the available sources say. In its official statement, the Broward County Sheriff's Office kept the language clinical. The victim and the suspect got into a verbal argument that turned physical inside White's car. Department spokesperson Miranda Grossman added, in comments to reporters, that at some point during that altercation, the victim was shot inside the vehicle. The gap between what White told investigators and what the video actually shows is going to be the central battle in this case. Not whether the shooting happened, but what it means legally. White claims the fight turned into a struggle over the gun. Chaotic, mutual. The footage, according to investigators, shows something deliberate. Pulling the gun from the waistband, firing at a specific point. That's the fight prosecutors and the defense are going to have if this goes to trial. The state needs to prove premeditation using that video, while the defense needs to sell the jury on an escalating physical struggle that ended in an accidental shot, not a planned one. Under Florida law, a first-degree murder conviction involving a firearm under aggravating circumstances leaves exactly two possible outcomes: the death penalty or life without parole. There's no middle ground, no 40 years with a chance at release option. That reality shapes the entire case. Any plea deal, if one's even on the table, would require the charge itself to change, not just the length of a sentence. When your only two options are death or life with zero chance of release, there's rarely room for a middle ground negotiation. In most cases like this, the defense pushes to get the charge reduced before the trial even starts, because it's the classification of the charge, not just the facts, that determines what's even possible as an outcome. As of the most recent major coverage, there was no public record of White having retained a lawyer. Based on what's known, the defense doesn't have many strong options. One is challenging the footage itself, a tough sell given its quality and how closely it lines up with what the neighbors reported hearing. Another is leaning into the history of the relationship and the struggle over the gun version, trying to frame this as a moment of passion instead of a planned act, aiming to get the charge knocked down. The third, least likely given how clear the footage is, would be denying involvement altogether, which would directly contradict what White has already told investigators. No official source confirms which direction the defense is actually taking. Anything about how the case has moved forward since then comes almost entirely from social media, including posts linked to Harrison's family. And that information is far less reliable than anything from an official statement or court filing. Several of those posts claim that at a later hearing, the formal arraignment, not the initial appearance, White pleaded not guilty. No major outlet or official document has confirmed that. There's been no public statement from the Broward County State Attorney's Office about the outcome of preliminary hearings, a trial date, or any plea negotiations. Harrison's family set up a GoFundMe to cover funeral costs, started by a relative named Chaddy. It raised more than $28,000 against a $25,000 goal, meaning the same audience that had generated income for Harrison through likes and views during her life ended up funding her funeral and gave more than what was originally asked for. The funeral service was held Friday, December 5th, 2025 at 6 p.m. at Mount Calvary Baptist Church on Northwest 8th Avenue in Pompano Beach. The burial followed the next day, December 6th at 1 p.m. at the same church. The family split the goodbye across 2 separate days, which is unusual, and hints at a tension inside the family that would come fully into view on the day of the service itself. That tension centered on how she'd be buried. Her father objected to burying his daughter the way she'd chosen to live, in a wig. Her mother pushed back, insisting on a public memorial that reflected who her daughter actually was. In the end, Harrison was laid to rest in a pink Versace robe, inside a clear acrylic casket, so that her image stayed visible to everyone who came to say goodbye, right up to her final public appearance. Outside the church, a digital billboard played through photos of her in her signature wigs, echoing the way she'd presented herself to the world for years. Around 100 people showed up, carrying pink balloons, wearing shirts printed with her portrait. At the service, her father, despite everything he'd said before, stood beside her mother at the casket and comforted her. People who were there described that moment as both a reconciliation and a quiet, overdue acceptance of the daughter he had. The most high-profile public reaction came from rapper JT of the duo City Girls, whose music had played in the background of Girl Alala's videos for years. JT donated to the fundraiser. Reports vary on the amount, somewhere between $5,000 and $13,500, along with hashtags calling for the protection of Black and transgender women. Separately, in a since-deleted Instagram story, she spoke more directly to her followers. Stories about domestic violence shouldn't get treated as a joke just because the person telling them delivers it with a laugh. Behind that kind of delivery, she said, there's often real pain that people have gotten used to scrolling right past like it's just another viral clip. She added that this wasn't just about transgender women. Black cisgender women dealing with abuse get the same treatment, their stories written off as entertainment instead of a cry for help. The reaction from advocacy groups followed almost immediately. Victoria Kirby York of the National Black Justice Collective called it a devastating loss of a shining light from her home state. Angela Farrell Zabala of Moms Demand Action said Harrison's death was a brutal reminder that transgender people, and Black trans women specifically, face violence at disproportionate rates. Two organizations with completely different missions, one focused on black LGBTQ rights, the other on gun control, landed on the exact same point. This wasn't a statistical outlier. It was part of a pattern. Those statements weren't just emotional reactions, they were backed by numbers. According to Everytown for Gun Safety, Harrison was at least the 18th transgender or gender non-conforming person killed by violence in 2025, and at least the 15th killed specifically by a firearm. The US Department of Justice reports that transgender people are 2.5 times more likely to be victims of violence than the cisgender population, and in at least 19% of those cases, the person responsible is an intimate partner or family member. The timing added another layer. Harrison died during Transgender Awareness Week, just days before Transgender Day of Remembrance on November 20th. Those numbers matter because they place this one case inside something much bigger. Firearms and intimate partners aren't some random combination of risk factors for transgender people in America. It's one of the most common ways these deaths actually happen. The case was picked up by major outlets: NBC Miami, Local 10, Oxygen, TMZ, Newsweek. It also got airtime on Law and Crime, where host Jesse Weber and attorney John Day broke down the indictment and the key video footage on air, zeroing in on the contradiction between White's account and what the footage actually shows, a gap that keeps this case legally complicated, even with evidence this strong. As of now, the case is still open, no verdict. For Harrison's family, that means the wait for justice keeps stretching out, with no clear end in sight. Gurla Lala will be remembered by her followers, her clients, and her family as someone who could make a stranger smile just through a phone screen, even as she was unable, by every account, to keep herself safe in the relationship that turned out to be her last. People who never met her in person still talk about how she shaped the way they saw themselves. For years, her own videos, the bruises, the cuts, the jokes about constant fighting, pulled in likes and laughs in the comments, while whatever she was actually going through went completely unheard. And the question that's left behind is this one: why did the signs of domestic violence, staged for the camera in the name of getting likes, go unnoticed until it's already too late?